Hi everybody, thanks for joining me again today. It's Allison with the Everyday Scrapbooker, and I have a Christmas card to share with you today. I am planning on coloring as well, and I'm using this super adorable stamp set. It's an older stamp set from close to my heart called Wonder of the Season, and I chose to use it because it had a poinsettia on it, and I really wanted to create a card with a poinsettia. I had never done it to this point. I'd never owned anything with a poinsettia on it. So this was a prime opportunity for me to do something that I had never done before. I also pulled out some scrap pattern paper. It's been in my stash for quite a while, and I thought it paired perfectly with the stamp that I planned on using for a festive and holiday themed card. So I trimmed the pattern paper down to slightly smaller than a standard A2 card, which is 4¼ inches by 5½. And then I matted the white cardstock behind that. Next, I'm going to pull out my Cuttlebug and all of my thin cuts because I'm going to be looking for the Stitch Circle thin cut set. You'll see it here pop up in just a moment. And I'm going to cut the largest circle from the set to stamp phrase on from the Christmas themed stamp set. So there's the thin cut right there. Like I said, it's the largest circle in the set, and I'm just using some scrap white daisy cardstock to cut that from. I like using a bit of washi tape to hold my thin cuts in place so they don't slide around when I'm doing the cutting process. There's my ancient Cuttlebug right there, and I'm just quickly cutting that circle. Once that's done, I'm going to stamp. I don't think I stamped the sentiment right away, but I will cut one side of the circle off, just like 1/4 inch, not very much, because I want one side to be flat so it lays flush with the edge of the cardstock or pattern paper. We'll see that in just a little bit here. So I'm just going to lay the circle on top of the pattern paper to get an idea of how much I really want trimmed off, and then obviously trim off a small portion of that circle. Now I can go ahead and stamp the poinsettia. I used my intense black ink from Close to My Heart to stamp that image. And if you've watched my videos before, you know how much I love this ink when I plan to color or watercolor an image. I use this ink because it doesn't bleed when you add a different color or a different medium. A different medium is what I mean, to the paper. I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity for me to practice my shading again. I'm using my Spectrum Noir Tri-Blend markers to color in the image, and I chose the dark red blend and the light green blend, I do believe, to color the image in. And I always do a little test swatch before I actually color any of my images in, because I'm just trying to figure out which color I actually want to use, if I want to use all three or just the lightest color or the medium or whichever. And in this case, I decided to use all three of the colors because I wanted to practice my shading skills and get a little bit better at that. So I started off with the deep red marker, and I'm going to color in all the petals on the poinsettia. I actually colored the poinsettia in a couple of times just to get the depth of color that I wanted in the end. I wanted it to be really dark and rich, and I hope I achieved that by coloring it over a couple of times. I did the same also with the leaves as well, just adding more color, more layers to deepen the color and make them more vibrant. I had never done this before this point because I was afraid that the more color I used, the more it would soak through the paper. But I actually found that it didn't soak through the paper as much as I thought it would. So that made me happy. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but I also pulled out the citrus yellow tri-blend marker as well because I plan to use that to color in the very center of the poinsettia. It's a really small part of the stamp, so it might actually be hard to see in the very end. but it is there if you can't see it, even if you can't see it. Once I've got the poinsettia colored in, I'm going to fussy cut it out. There is no coordinating thin cut set that goes with this stamp set, so you got to go old school and cut it out by hand. So I discovered as I was coloring and practicing my shading that coloring over the entire image with the lightest color in the tri-blend marker after all three colors has been applied to the image that you're coloring really helps to smooth the transition out between each of the color gradients. Before this point, I had just applied the lightest color and then the next darkest and then lastly the darkest to achieve the shading, but I found that the transition was very blocky and kind of chunky, and I just figured I would try something different with this image. So I decided to color over the entire image again with that lightest color. And I was really happy to find that it just helped smooth the transition between all three of those colors. So I will be using that technique again, and I will not forget it anytime soon. I haven't gotten to the leaves yet, but you'll find when I do get there, I will follow the same process with the green color. I'll make a little swatch off to the side before I color in the leaves, just to first of all figure out if this is the shade of green that I actually want to use. There are two different shades of green in the tri-blend markers. This one is on the lighter side and the other marker that is in the set is darker and more olive toned. And I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to stick with this light green or go with the darker green. In my other crafting, I tend to gravitate towards the darker green. I really like the color, and I had decided in this particular instance that I wanted to do something different, and so I was going to use the lighter green, but I still had to test it out first, and there you can see I'm testing it. So once again, I used all three colors in the tri-blend marker, beginning with the lightest color, moving to the medium shade, and then finishing off with the darker to create the shading. And then I'll go over it once again with the lightest shade of the marker just to blend everything together and smooth out the gradient transitions. It's probably a good idea to use a cardstock that has a heavier weight to it. I'm not 100% sure what the weight is on Close to My Heart cardstock. I think it's probably about 80-pound, maybe even 100-pound weight. I'd have to double check that because I'm not 100% sure, but obviously the heavier the paper weight is, the less the marker and color is going to soak through, which is a really nice thing when you are working with paper because you don't want it to soak through and mark up your surface. If it is a lighter weight cardstock, make sure you have something underneath your paper just so that it catches the ink that would come through. I like using my what is that black thing called? My stamp pad. There is a technical word for it. It's escaping me right now, but y'all know what I mean. It's there to help keep your workspace clean and aid in your stamping too when you're stamping, just to give a little bit of cushion. So now I am fussy cutting out my poinsettia. Fussy cutting is also another long and tedious chore when it comes to crafting, but sometimes it's necessary, especially if there's no thin cuts that goes along with your image. After I had my poinsettia cut out, I thought it would be a really nice touch to add some stickles and some glitter to the poinsettia. You know how when you're in the store shopping for your poinsettias, sometimes they have some sparkle on them. And that's what I had in my head when I was coloring in my poinsettia and making it look all pretty. I just thought adding the stickles would take it to the next level. I applied it, you're going to see it here in a little bit, but I'm going to apply it with a paintbrush. But actually, maybe I should back up the bus here a little bit because I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just playing with the sentiment that comes with the stamp set. I'm not entirely sure what it says now. I can't see on my screen what it says. I'm not sure if you could or not, but it's Christmassy. I actually found at this point that my circle was a little too small for the message that I wanted to stamp on it from the Wonder of the Season stamp set. But I decided I was going to make it work. I didn't want to cut another circle and use up more paper to get that done. So it was just going to have to do. I also was playing around with poinsettia placement because so much of the circle was going to be taken up by the stamped message. I wasn't entirely sure where or how I was going to attach the poinsettia to the card without covering everything up. And you can see that I'm going over my poinsettia again. I think this is the second time now with the Spectrum Noir markers, just in an attempt to try and deepen that color. I think I go over it once, maybe two more times before I'm actually done with it, and add the Stickles for a little bit of glitter. If you weren't aware, Close to My Heart cardstock is smooth. There are textured cardstocks out there on the market, but all of Close to My Heart's cardstock is smooth. Sometimes it's nice to have texture in your cardstock, especially if you're using it for different things. But the neat thing about Close to My Heart cardstock is that it is two-toned, except for your white cardstock, your black cardstock, and the craft. All the other colors in their collection has one side is darker toned, the other side is lighter toned, so you get twice the mileage out of your cardstock. And the center of Close to My Heart cardstock is white as well. They call it white core. So for all of my crafting, and also for this poinsettia in particular, it is stamped on smooth cardstock, not textured. Sometimes that textured cardstock will get in the way of your stamping as well. So it's always nice to work with a paper that really encourages nice, clean, and even stamping. So now I'm laying everything back down again on the card mat. I pulled out the stamp again. I think it says something along the lines of, "May the joy of the season be yours," or something along those lines. I decided to stamp it on that little circle using black ink. And I really like where the circle is, where I placed it on the card mat. So I think that's probably where I'm going to adhere it and let it live. I'm still going to play around a little bit with where I'm going to place the poinsettia. It's really kind of an awkward shape, and getting it in just the right spot was a little bit of a struggle, but I think I decided to turn it sort of upside down so the leaves are facing inwards towards the circle, and adhere it to the side with some little foam squares. So there I'm taking out the foam squares, and I'm just going to pop them onto the back of the poinsettia and adhere it to the card base. I like using the foam squares just to give it a little bit of dimension and height, and I wanted to separate it a little bit from the half circle as well. And so that's another reason why I used the foam squares right here. Now, you've probably noticed by now, if you watch my videos regularly, that there's always going to be some sort of stamping or typing or watercoloring, depending on the paper, on the reverse side of whatever paper it is I'm using. That's because I always dive into my paper stash first and use that up before I go ahead and use something new. Now I'm going ahead and actually stamping another image from the stamp set that I was using. I'm trying to figure out what the function is of this stamp. I think it might be the centers of holly, but I'm not 100% sure. I originally was thinking of using these three circles to bring a little bit more attention to the very center of the poinsettia on my card. But after getting it colored and fussy cut out, I felt like they were too big, so I ended up leaving them off the card. I do plan to use the stamp set again, so I will have to go back and dig a little bit further, meaning I'll have to look at this stamp set again a little more closely and figure out what those 3 little circles are meant to be. Once I've got the circles fussy cut out and decided against using them, I'm going to flip the pattern paper mat over, throw some adhesive on it, and attach it to my card base. You are going to notice some more printing on the flip side of the pattern paper mat as well, because it's attached to white daisy cardstock. And then after that, I'm going to add some bitty sparkles. You could see just a little bit of that sparkle in the poinsettia just when I moved the mat around. Did you notice that? I love it. It's so pretty. And adding the bitty sparkles just adds a little bit more sparkle around the poinsettia and card, and just a finishing touch, I think. I love using the bitty sparkles. They are subtle, but they pack such a big punch. With that, my card is pretty well completed. It was a really simple card to put together. It was a lot of fun to make, and I'm so super excited that I finally have a poinsettia stamp in my stash to use over and over again. And I really love it paired with that pattern paper. It was just paper that I had in my stash and I've had for quite a while, and I thought after I paired the two together that they couldn't have worked better together. It was a perfect pairing. I'm so glad that you took time out of your day to join me and view my video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. I would sincerely appreciate it. And if you'd like to see more process videos like this, both scrapbook and card process videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click that little bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for joining me. I will be back again very soon. Thanks, guys.